I can say I've been waking up a ball of nerves every day and even meditating. And yesterday I ran 6.5 miles. Has not, it's helping. But this process of mixing the paint right now is pretty soothing. So I'm relieved to be here at this point of the week. Kind of ready to dig into this. So this is actually, the phthalo blue is so strong. I don't, yeah, I think you can see this on the screen too. This is really still reading quite blue because it's overpowering the crimson and the burnt umber. I'm gonna leave it like that. I could add more burnt umber to try to even it out, but there's not, in this busy background that I have planned, there's not a lot of blue going on, so I'm hoping that it'll sit on top of here enough that I can actually still see my line work and use it for basically my map and composition for later when I go to put my color over top. Just clean off my palette knife. So I'm moving my paints over out of the way a little bit just to make sure I have room. I have a clean rag here for wiping away at the painting if there's marks I don't like. And a different one for wiping off my palette knife. Put the color palette to the side. And for now, in my painting, there's not a ton going on up in this corner, so I'm just gonna lay this up here for you all. At some point, I may have to move it out of the way a bit. But for now, that'll work. So I'm making my mixture of the ultramarine blue, not ultramarine, phthalo blue. Get your colors right, Jolyn. Phthalo blue, burnt umber, and alizarin crimson. Watering it down. I don't want it too chunky as I'm just trying to get these colors, or not colors, lines laid in. And I'll start with a contour line. And I am going to start thinking about how big I want to make this in relation to my piece of paper. It's a fairly central thing I'm looking at with round edges. I'm not wanting to have to, what I can see in the background is a heater, a curtain, a tripod. There's a dictionary down here that everything's set up on top of. Those things aren't important, and it's pretty likely that these outer corners of the painting are going to end up being this very dark color I just mixed. But for now, I need to think about where and how I want the skull to be centered, and then the flowers underneath, so that I don't end up just painting the skull across like this and making the flowers an afterthought. So I am going to move this up out of the way a little bit because I just need to not have it blocking my viewpoint too much. And so I'm just going to try to get started. Trust your intuition on these things. And already I'm like, okay, I'm pushing the peonies down here. It's not what I want. So instead of starting with the skull, I'm going to start with the flowers. I want them to be the most important part of the painting. One thing I have to accept today is that I don't have quinacridone red or quinacridone magenta. I have alizarin crimson and quinacridone magenta, and neither of those are going to nail the color of pink that I need for the peonies, which is actually this color right here. So I'm coming in at a color disadvantage. You all can't actually see the flowers, so it's not gonna be as noticeable to you. I'll at some point pull the still life down and show it to you so you can see the actual color, but I'm gonna have to accept in my mind that the color won't be perfectly addressed today. And sometimes it never is. Sometimes I paint flowers. I think more with flowers than anything else, I'll run into a wall where I can't get my pigments to match. So that could be the case this week, next week or two, while I try to keep these peonies alive. I actually took some of the buds that are in like little round balls and put them in the refrigerator so that they would open up later than the rest of the bunch in an effort to keep some of them for looking at next week. And these are interesting because they have like fluffier centers. They're not, and then the larger petals on the outside. Almost like a parrot tulip frilliness. So one thing that I might regret is that I'm dragging my hand across here, but when I come up to paint the skull, I'm gonna need to keep my arm up or I'll pull right through what I painted, and I can do that. I just need to remember. I'm happy with this blue mixture. Okay, and now I'm right here in this spot. I'm hitting the teeth on that, the molars on that deer skull. They're right across here. So let's see how that comes in and goes. There's also a piece of pink fabric coming across and down like this. Some shadow. I like lines like that. I might not say a ton about it. I might not speak to the value a lot later on in the painting, but that little line creates a container. It kind of gives a framework for the story. And then I'm just coming back to my spot of like, here's the teeth, and then taking a moment to say the center of this peony's here. Where's the eye in relation to that, or the eye socket in this case? Where's that line across the middle ridge of the head? And then also looking at the stem coming through for the perspective on the peony. And so I'm using my brush to line up that stem as it comes back across. and just getting some of that movement in there. And so there's this peonies coming across here, and it's that stem right there. I could probably in this painting get away with not painting those stems in, but at least at this point, I want to say something about that, just for my own headspace, and then later on I'll decide whether it's adding something to what I'm trying to say or if it's just become too distracting. But for now, I'm going to put it in there because I always take it out later. We're back at the teeth, rounds across here, the undershot of the eye socket, then across here. I'm using a little bit more watery paint. My lines are a little lighter at this point. I notice that when I paint flowers, I don't do the kind of classical vase in the middle of the page with flowers coming up out of it. It's actually pretty hard to paint, in my opinion, to paint that really well. That's a tough composition to work with, where you have two things that are so central, the bunch of flowers and then the vase right in the middle. Unless you create some noise around it, like with some pushed fabric or the shadows and the way the light comes across, it'll really highlight any problems you might have with your light and perspective. It's a good study tool, so don't feel weird if you're painting that right now and why am I doing it. It's tough. It's tough to get a subject matter like that to look good and interesting. So I tend to blow my flowers up and make them larger in the foreground, or I'll paint many vases next to each other, or like a countertop with a lot of different objects on, because it doesn't give me so much empty space to try to figure out what to do with. Another thing I would suggest as you're painting landscapes and still lifes, or really anything, when you have an opportunity, again, to go to an art museum and actually look at other people's paintings, other artists' paintings in real life, what you'll see, what was a real eye-opener for me was like going to see like a Cezanne or a Van Gogh or Monet in a real museum, and realizing that when you get up close to their paintings, they look like they have problems too. They're supposed to be these remarkable masterpieces, but we see photos and art images and posters and reproductions that really take away the quality of the paint. So you don't, in a reproduction of a Cezanne painting, you don't have the opportunity to go up close to it and see that a bunch of the canvas is showing through and that it looks almost unfinished, or that the lines are choppy, or maybe it looks like he did that painting in 2 hours and it could have used an extra hour. I mean, those pieces are perfect the way they are, but that it will make, if you really go up close and look at them, it'll make you feel better about your painting, because the things that you often don't like about your paintings up close are actually happening in master artists' work too. and I'm not talking so much about the Renaissance paintings that have the like really lush table settings with cherubs and like beautiful movement and stunning light. Like those people and painters are experts in creating a finished quality. At the same time, that work is often almost appears garish to me, so it's not what I'm as attracted to. And it's a method, particularly with oil paint, that was used in many ways even before photography, sometimes to tell a story, but also I believe to impress. So the next time that you get to go to a museum, or even if you can take some time to look online, like try to blow those paintings up and really look at them, and almost take the moment to critique them or criticize them the way that you would critique or criticize your own work. Because we generally, when we look at what we make, don't do ourselves any favors. You're not like looking at it through the lens of, I'm an expert and nobody could ever question what I make. But as soon as you see something, even in a gallery, but also particularly in a museum, you think, well, this is the status quo, and this is what everybody should be aspiring to. And what I would say is that it's relieving for me to go in. Sometimes it's humbling and humiliating to go in and sit and look at a Paul Klee painting for 2 hours in the Metropolitan Museum and cry, because it's so simple and so beautiful. I don't know how I would ever get there, but also those marks that he makes and the choices in color, it seems very intuitive and not so much skill-based. There's skill there, but it's not anybody striving for perfection. This is a little different than, I'm a little slower today and not so gestural. I'm in a mood. And the length, I tend to really elongate the nose on these deer skull. They're much squatter than I paint them. And this one is also having that issue, and I'm probably not going to change it. I am going to try to open up this a little bit. It's on a slant. But I'm going to let go of this. In the photo, I can see it too, but it's doing that partially. Just the lens of the camera will adjust everything. So, but they're fuller across here than I tend to paint them. And so I'll note it for next time, but I'm happy with how this composition's going, so I'm not going to go back in and try to change that. So before I call this underpainting finished, checking my lines over here. They're kind of fuzzy and not very dark. That feels good. There's a ridge that comes across here. And then I want to get a little shadow. Let's think about the shadow a bit. There's some shadow right here, come across the flower and from the skull. There's a faint shadow, this curves down. The fabric is actually curving right here. And so the shadow from the nose of the deer skull kind of fades across there too. And there's some shadow in here. And it comes across like this. And through here. So there's a fold in the fabric right here that's creating another shadow. I'm not even really painting the fabric, but I am painting the values of that shadow in there. And then it's in shadow across here too. Didn't show up on my photo, but I see it in life. And then there's another line for the fabric that comes here. I'm going to go ahead while I have all this dark paint on my palette and come in and decide where I want. I'm just going to paint this background black. I'm going to switch to a larger brush. I'm using like a number 2 right now. Maybe, I think it's a 2. So just grabbed this kind of springy, large, bright, size 10 or 12. I tell you what the size was, but there's too much paint all over the handle, so I can't actually read it anymore. I'm just scraping some paint across here. Now, if I sit and lean one way, I can see the fabric across here, and if I go like this, I only see the flowers. And I've painted it both ways. So I'm not going to go in all the way and figure out what I'm not going to make a choice right now about this area. It's pretty secondary compared to everything else. I could cut down here with this dark and block out behind the flower, or I can come here across the top and then allow this fabric to be pink. I'm going to make that choice later. And just get these darks in so they can dry while I work on my color mixing. That way I won't be fighting with this, trying to figure out how to get the darks in and then the lights up against it. Got a lot of paint pouring off of here with the water, so I'm shaking it off onto the painting. And also with these plant stems, the peony stems, I don't have to say it all. I'm indicating they're up there. I don't know if I'll leave them in the painting. And down here in this corner, there's a bit of glare that you can see. The fabric comes up like this, goes down like that, and then it comes across. So for now, I'm going to leave this brown where the fabric is. I'm not I'm already regretting that. It makes my skull seem like it scoops down. So let's say that the fabric comes in and the skull's sitting on top of it. Those drips weren't supposed to be there. That doesn't matter so much either. I'm just creating this black line across the bottom, which sort of frames it. Has the bit of a look of a Thanksgiving cornucopia with all that color bouncing through the background. But for me, darkening in these values in the back helps to make this not so busy, that when I come back to it, I'll be able to focus on it and not worry so much about this. I'm going to pull this aside to dry, and I'm going to work on the color mixing.